What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Convene Communities podcast with your host. That's right, the one, the only Matthew Kerman.
All right. Thanks, Andy. That was great. I appreciate it. So here with Jeff Bateson and like always, Andy Barker. Appreciate it. And we have a special guest tonight, Laurel Marr. How are you doing tonight, Laurel?
I am good. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, we're talking about a topic that is really interesting. I always say, I hate to say it, but I'm going to be honest with everybody. It's only two positives in life. You're going to be born and then you're going to die, right? And it's something that we really don't want to talk about. We don't want to focus on, but that's something that you do as a business. You are a death doula. And when I first met you, I had no idea what a death doula is. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and then tell us what a death doula is.
All right. Well, my name is Laurel Marr, and currently I live in Virginia, but I moved here recently from New York City. Prior to that, I was out in Colorado, grew up in the Southeast, so I've lived many different parts of this country. I have been in church ministry for about a decade, so that is where this, this idea of developing a community based on end-of-life education and care has come from. It's come from my time in the church. And a death doula specifically is a person. The word doula means servant. It's someone who is trained in all aspects of end of life, from the planning to what happens as a person dies, how to work with the family in grief care, all the way through funeral planning and, what happens in life after someone dies, being with a family through the entire journey. So that's a death doula. We're a servant through the entire journey of end of life care.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's really different. I had no idea. And, how I met was through a meeting, through a Synapse meeting. And I was like, well, okay, this is very interesting. But we got on a Zoom call. And when we got on that Zoom call, the first question out of my mouth is, what's a death doula? It was very shocking to me. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting. People have either heard of it, they've already been educated what a death doula is, or they say, I know about a birth doula. And they say, so same type of thing with end of life care. And, it's a very easy way to launch into it. But I do think people are surprised at the scope of knowledge that a death doula needs to have, because making plans for a smooth end of life process is very important. Most times when I step into a job, the planning hasn't been started. Yeah.
Laurel, you said some people know what a death doula is. Who is it? Like a certain person in a certain group, or I'd never heard of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I lived in New York, that's where I did my training. I did a remote training. So, I wasn't in person in New York, even though the woman who trained me lived in New York. I actually did not, get the access to her over anyone else who was training. So most people in New York know what a death doula is. When I moved to Virginia and started attending, end of life presentations, senior presentations, anything in that field, I went and introduced myself and I said, I'm an end of life doula, a death doula. I was bringing the name to familiarity for a lot of people. But since I've been here, I have met a couple other death doulas that have popped up. They haven't decided to train because I came to Virginia and told everyone what a death doula was. It's just an emerging field. People are starting to hear about it more and more.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're going to get into this specifically in the later part and talk about it. But touch on a couple of things that a death doula might help a family out with, and then we'll talk about your modules and how you're teaching people a little bit later. But touch specifically on, what a death doula does.
Well, it's interesting because, the work that I'm doing by creating my own curriculum, I'm doing this because I've seen out in the death doula world that there's no foundation of Christianity. It's very spiritual. We can't face death without talking about spirituality to some degree. And so what I've done with my program is I've taken the main elements of what death doula programs are doing and I've Christianized them. So what are those main elements? that one is a legacy project. A lot of people are hiring end-of-life doulas because they want to leave a legacy for people who are come after them. Maybe it's a grandchild that's not yet been born, or maybe in the case of one of the first clients I ever had, the mother that was dying was in her early 40s, and she had an 8-year-old daughter. She wanted to leave a legacy project for that daughter. And in her project, the projects can vary. Hers were recorded videos of her talking about what she'd want to tell her daughter when her daughter hit a specific milestone, like a graduation from high school or the day before she got married. An older person, maybe a veteran, maybe they want to do a legacy project such that they, share stories of their of war and what their life has been like and what they've learned. They may want to, stretch it out for something more like that. So it's really up to the person. So this legacy project is a big part of people wanting to hire a doula. So doulas are, trained in what are the trends in legacy projects. It's kind of that's certainly the real popular aspect of it. But beyond that, if you don't have any end of life planning in place, and I'm speaking specifically of advance directive, and that's your living will. What type of treatment do you want? If you don't have someone chosen, a healthcare power of attorney, to speak your wishes when you're not able to do so, that is going to make things very, very difficult. Some extreme cases, they end up in court because somebody's been put on life support. The husband says, my wife wouldn't want that. And the parents say, oh, yes, she would. And these cases can end up in court for years while a patient is, remains on life support and family members are suffering, and it gets very expensive. So a simple document that doesn't cost any money can save everybody a lot of heartache. So being trained in what do you need? And it actually gets, like I say, it's a simple document, it is, but as a person increases, in age or in the severity of their illness, more like, you may go from a basic advanced directive to needing a DNR. And a lot of people just assume, well, I have a DNR because I said in my advanced directive that I don't want to be resuscitated. Well, actually, when someone's on hospice care and maybe they're making some visits to the hospital, they can actually have a medically ordered DNR, and that is different. And so, a doula needs to be educated in all of these things to make sure that as someone ages and is closer to death, as someone with a terminal illness gets worse at that illness and closer to death, everything is in place and things are going to run as smoothly as possible for the comfort of the patient, for the anxiety level of the patient, and for everyone involved. And also, when that person dies, if it does not go well, a family can suffer grief for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. One of the things that you said to me early on when you were explaining it to me is that, the whole death positive movement, and then the timing of, people that as they go through that death, and let's say they don't have any of those directives, and the family ends up scrambling. The family ends up becoming such a, at the time, working extremely hard, right, about getting ready for that. Maybe that end of life time frame. So it makes sense to hire a death doula because you're taking the burden and taking the workload off of them.
It really does, because if I'm trained with the answers to the questions that most people will have, they don't have to spend time trying to find those answers, because I can help them, immediately answer them. And another thing that happens, and this can be stressful, like let's take an elderly mother, for instance, say she's in her 80s and she is having a conversation with her adult children about the care she, intends to have. And I'm going to say she doesn't want continued care. She doesn't want intubation, which would be a feeding tube or a breathing tube, or she doesn't want to be resuscitated. Family members can get very upset. They can't ever imagine their mother not being here. And she says, no, this is what I want. And this is who I've chosen to state these wishes for me when I can't state them for myself. It can cause a lot of pain in a family. It can wreak a lot of havoc in a family. So a doula can help mediate through that. Now, we're not miracle workers. We're coming in to a part of life where, decades of of story are already there. But with patience and with, listening and just some wisdom, try to, help the family through this planning process, because it can be really, really stressful. But let's say it's in crunch time and someone's actually in the hospital with a terminal diagnosis and they say, I don't want to have this continued care. It can be really, really stressful. So you got to be organized, and you got to do a lot of counseling with people, because what really happens is as the body, is shutting down, and a patient can no longer get out of bed, no longer, take solid foods, and they're not, taking liquid. It's really traumatizing for people because they just can't believe death is really happening. So the end of life planning process can help prepare family members for this too.
So you and death doulas and people that want to get into this field, sounds like to me, have to have a pretty particular skill set in communicating with people. Does it? And you mentioned counseling, right? So maybe a counselor as well. But does it help to have, or would it help to have, or not, any sort of legal background?
Oh, great question. Well, no, you don't need a legal background at all. And advance directive, it's a legal document, but you don't have to have a lawyer draw it up.
Yeah.
There are, you can go to your state website and they will have advance directives available. Now, you do have to have witness, and some states require a notary to notarize the document, but that's a handful of states. Like I know both states I've recently been in, Virginia and New York, don't require a notary on that.
Okay.
But right, so you don't have to have an attorney, and you could actually save a lot of money by having a end of life doula help you. What happens is when people go into the estate planning process, a lawyer likely will draft up an advance directive.
Sure.
What's kind of going on now is that since we're in the denial of death, people say, oh sure, just draft it. But we don't think about it. We don't talk about it. It's there. We may send it to the hospital so it's on file, but there is a more subjective advance directive out there that asks you, real questions about, who do you want to be with you, when you're dying? Are there any hymns or readings that you'd like to have read? What do you want people that care about you to know to know before you die, right? So it'll speak for you, and filling it out when you're a healthy person makes you contemplate what end of life could possibly be about. So my suggestion is that when people do their estate planning with a lawyer, they can say, well, I want to do this advance directive, or they could, study the advance directive and some of these subjective questions and even incorporate them into their advance directive by the lawyer. That's what I did.
Okay.
Yeah, so lots of options. And a doula, though, can help you with all of this.
How fortuitous is this topic tonight? Because Jeff looks like he's fading into the nether region
further back
there.
into the lake.
That's so funny. Laurel, so a lot of people might think that, okay, there's a different, hospice. Everybody thinks hospice, but there's a difference in a death doula and hospice, right? You both serve an extremely important role in the end of life process. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, ideally, a doula will be hired prior to hospice care. So when someone gets a terminal illness, that doesn't mean that they're immediately going to start hospice. It doesn't mean they should or shouldn't. It depends on the case. I currently have a client that was given a year, some months ago, and he is doing a clinical trial. So he's currently not on hospice, but he and I have sat and had a lot of conversations, and we've already met with the hospice that he will choose if the clinical trial, doesn't work. But right now he's not ready. And so, but that doesn't mean we're not having these conversations, that we've done our homework. He used a specific hospice for his mom, and he said, I don't want to use that hospice. I want to do something new. So, I know some hospice providers here by being in my community and going to networking events and meeting others. So it's easy for me. I just call up some of the other people I've met and say, hey, I want to introduce you to my client. So that's one way that a doula can be really helpful in getting people onto hospice, and a doula can come on before hospice, because people really don't want to choose hospice. So a doula can be very, very helpful in that moment, because hospice is going to make end of life better than it would be if you weren't on hospice care. But once hospice care is in place, what's the value of a doula at that point? That's really what you're asking, but I just had to preface that a little bit. So the value is that we're not regulated. So we're not regulated by insurance. Doulas are private pay. Hospice, a lot of people say they're disappointed. They're like, well, we didn't get as much time with hospice as we expected. Well, it's just that that's universal. Hospice has regulated hours, and they can only give a certain number of hours. And it really depends where you are in your care. If you're at the beginning of hospice, you may not see a nurse but every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If you're at the end of hospice care, you may have a nurse come by for half an hour to an hour every day. And families think, well, we need someone here more than that. Mm-hmm. Now, a doula is not a nurse, can't do any, medical tasks, but we can still be there, and we understand exactly what's happening as the body shuts down. So we're there to tell the, family what's going on and remind them. And at that point, the family is caring for the patient. The nurse, unless the family hires a nurse to be there around the clock, the family's administering any medications if they're being given, such as morphine.
Yeah. So and again, you're going a little bit stepping above, and I could not believe when you told me that there is not a faith-based death doula program in the world, that there's not one. To me, that blew my mind. It just blew my mind. So talk a little bit about that and why your program is so important. And we're going to end up transitioning here to the next section in a moment.
Great. Okay. Well, so I was actually working in a church when I was pointed in the direction by a minister to look at being an end-of-life doula. A couple churches I had worked in, quickly pastors had noticed that I had a gift in being around people either before, during or after, the process of death. So this priest said to me, I recently heard about this job as an end-of-life doula. She said, I don't know a lot about it, but she said that she had a family, and it was no longer part of the parish, but they had been a part of the parish. So she went by to see them as the husband was dying. And it was a younger family. I want to say he was early 50s. There were several children in the home, and the wife was going to be widowed at 49 or 50 years old, and she was his caregiver, and she needed more help. So she actually hired a doula. The doula came. I guess she interviewed her, maybe she didn't hire her, but she interviewed her, and she wasn't a Christian. And so she didn't choose her, and said they couldn't find a Christian death doula. So it's really important if you're a Christian. It's whatever your faith is. And so I'm speaking of Christians here. If you're a Christian and you're dying, your loved one's dying, you want the presence, likely, of a Christian servant, right? Who's going to be there and who's walking that journey with you and understands where your hope is placed, and if there's fears, because there are fears in death, they can, a trained Christian death doula can meet you in that moment and speak with you about the truth of the gospel.
Yep. And you're school trained, so you've been to school on theology and all that, which is important.
It's true. Yeah.
All right, so let's go into the next section where we're going to talk about, hey, so you had this great idea, you had this thought process, and you didn't really know how you were going to do it. So we'll go to the first slide, and you're inside of Convene, and you've built a community. And so let's look at the death and resurrection doula community inside of Convene.
Let's do it.
All right, so tell us about it. So this is the front page of your community, and this is kind of laying out who you are and what you do.
Yes, and my information page, it has a lot of information on there. And so I don't want people to read it and feel overwhelmed. Read it through and digest it, and maybe read it again, because not only am I talking about what this concept of a death doula is, I'm also taking it into the theological importance of the role. And death positive. I talk about death positive on that information page. And I personally, as a person who is a Christian, I have real concerns about the death positive movement from a spiritual perspective. I think that the practicality of it is noble, but I do know that doulas, because I've talked with them, I've seen the training programs, they are pushing individuality of end of life. I want what I want. I can't control death, but I can control the way that I die. Where from a Christian perspective, we have a tradition. We have things change, right? Back, 1,000 years ago, they weren't having funeral homes like we have them in our modern world. But what I mean by tradition is I'm meaning the importance of having a funeral is that we talk about why we die, because sin is in the world, and we talk about our hope, and we talk about the resurrection of Jesus. So that's a tradition as Christians we're holding on to. But death doulas in the secular realm are pushing, these like new methods of disposition, which is what do you do with the body after someone dies, and they're pushing a salvation through the choice that you have. So you can be buried, in a shroud without a casket and have a tree planted, and it's a giving back to the earth. But what we make sure in the Christian tradition is that we know we place our salvation nowhere else except for Jesus Christ. And so this doula movement is, we're reclaiming this conversation around death, but instead of doing it in a traditional manner, they're opening up this way of, have the death that you want, and maybe you can find some peace.
Yeah. So it's an amazing thing. Again, I never thought we'd have a death doula community, but it's actually, I'm going to be honest with everybody, this is one of the best communities inside of Convene, hands down, that we have. And you and I have spent a lot of time working through it and coming up with a strategy and building it through. So inside of the community, we do different things, right? So we'll talk about first discussion boards. So we got pull that up, and we'll, the key thing is that people get access to you and they can ask you questions, but also you can see there that somebody might not feel comfortable asking a question, so they can come in and put it in there anonymous. So talk about that.
Yeah. So to the discussion board, I have been asked a lot of different questions. And what I really like about it is it gives me a place to publicly respond, because I think a lot of people have a lot of the same questions. And so because this is a new role, and so if they can even go, filter through and say, wow, because I think a lot of people coming in don't know a lot, right? But if you post a great question, it gives me a place to post a really solid answer. Other people can read through it. So that's what I love about the discussion board.
Yeah. And here it is, you see you talked, and then here Eugene Brown made a comment, and then you come back and answer it. And there's more. I could only get a couple, but this one goes about 5 or 6 deep of people interacting about, what is a death doula. So part of the main focus of your main community is educating people on what a death doula is. It's not just about training death doulas, but it's also the education of a death doula. Yeah. Next part, the inside of that is the blog section. So we'll look at the blogs and give some examples that one example of how, what you might put.
Yep. No, this is a great one. So this Kathy, the woman who I interview in this video, she has cared for her mother who had dementia, and now she's caring for her husband who has the early stages of dementia. And she did a wonderful legacy project for her mother. I interviewed her, we looked at it, I asked her questions, she talked about how she did it, but at the very beginning of her mother's dementia, she started writing down the stories that her mother was telling her. And she went through photos, and she incorporated photos with the stories. And then she had, I think, a birthday party for her mother, and she left out, strips of paper where people could write their own memories about her mother. And she incorporated them to this lovely book. And as her mother's dementia progressed, she would read the stories to her mother. And so it's really, really lovely. And I interviewed her, put it up there into the community. It's also part of the training program. I have a section on legacy projects, and I incorporated that one there, which is really great because people come into the experiences. I know we'll get to this, but there's videos. I have a lot of interviews as much as I have information that, I've, attained through training as a doula and going to seminary. Yeah.
So it's a collaborative
It's
community.
a very, very collaborative
Hey,
community.
Laurel, you said you had a lot of interviews and you've talked to a lot of your clients and done these legacy projects. Are those interviews or are those projects something that you're going to share in your community in Convene, or is that something a little more private, or how does that work?
Well, no, the legacy projects, this video that we're talking to, it's the only legacy project video in there. I mean,
Okay.
My experience around the legacy project has links, it has information, but the video, is a very collaborative community. I have gone out and, done my research and found people who are experts in certain areas and done a one-on-one interview with them for them to share their knowledge because, I have mine, they have theirs, and then we bring them together to
Collaborating, right?
Yeah. All right. Next part is experiences. So talking about, experiences. Again, this is how we share our experience and knowledge with others and allow people to kind of collaborate inside of the communities. And this is 2 of your public ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because you're giving people a guide to end of life planning, the process to start thinking through it, right?
Yes. And I really recommend actually doing, if you're going to do, one of the experience, you need to do them both, because here in the guide to end of life planning, this is sort of like module 2, the practical section. You're going to, it's an introduction to, what are the basics of end of life planning. But if you go into the second one, old selves and new selves, you're beginning to look at your story. And so this is the theoretical side and the theological side of, preparing for death, right? One of the things I really, highlight in the theological module is in our life prior to death, we have stories of death and resurrection. And so we're kind of exploring that a little bit in old selves and new selves. Yeah.
I think that's great with the telling your story, because I mean, what's Convene built around? Everybody has a story, and tell your story, and you can do that even towards the end of life. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jeff, I'll tell you, like I've told Laurel this, I've told a lot of people this, is when I got my degree in Christian counseling, the first assignment that I had, I had to write my eulogy. Yeah. And the concept behind that was, if you can't write your eulogy, and if it's not true to who you are, if you're writing something that you wish you would become or you wish you were, then you better make changes to make your life what it needs to be. Yeah. So old selves, new selves, kind of in there.
It is. Well, one of the projects, so each module has a major project. The major project in module 1, you got to write your story, right? I don't think you're really able to go in and sit with families in the midst of their story if you don't know something about yourself. And then the major project in module 2 is you got to do your own end of life planning.
Yeah.
Don't be a doula without your end of life planning done.
Right.
All right. I want to get into kind of the meat and potatoes, and we're going to a little extra on this, but this is your groups. So talk a little bit about your groups, and then we're going to drill down in the Death and Doula Resurrecting Your Training program, and we're going to talk about your states here.
Yeah. Well, then let me just quickly highlight church communities and international death. Certified death and resurrection doula listings. So church communities, we are going to, work with churches. Once you're going through module 2 of the certification, there is a training on getting into church communities, teaching them about end of life planning, the importance of a doula. So having churches supporting us is really great, but also we're supporting churches and just fostering these relationships. But so that's part of it, but also we want churches to be a part of the conversation. We want pastors to be a part of the conversation, because death positive is a movement, but the Christian movement is something that's getting going with this ministry. I've seen a little bit of it out there. I know another Christian who's doing some end of life talks inside of churches in New York City, but I haven't seen anything else.
Yeah. And it's important, like we talk about, building this community up, so where people can find what they need and understand. It's almost like the directory of death doulas across the country. And we'll get into the states, but talk about that.
Well, let me say first, internationally, I've got, in conversation with someone from South Africa and from Scotland. So wants to be a doula. They want to be doulas. Yeah. So that's, we got to have a place to house those listings too.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. The resource that you're building, which is again wonderful. All right, let's talk about groups. Or your module one.
Yeah.
So in your training modules that we have. So you have 2 training modules, and talk about each of those, and then we're going to drill down in each of them.
Okay, great. Well, so this is a new program. I just launched the second module, the practitioner training, this week. Theology of the rediscovering the cross, theology and practice. That has been launched. I took a group through this summer. I've worked out the bugs, and it is now self-paced. Anybody can come in at any time and take it. And this fall, if someone starts module 1, they're invited to jump into the module 2 classes, so they aren't just alone. They can collaborate with other doulas. So that's kind of what's going on there. But there's 12 experiences, which is the Convene platform name for lessons. There's 12 experiences inside of each module, and you complete one at a time, and you have to complete both to get your certification. Yeah. And it includes like how to start your own business, how are we going to work with churches, like all of that. It is a package ready to go.
Yeah, so let's look at this is module 1. These are the experiences. So this is really where you get into the theology of being a death doula and a Christian death doula, a faith-based death doula. And so talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, what I say in my video on the 4th experience, why do we die? I said, this is what separates the Christian death doula from another death doula, is that we're looking at death squarely for what it is, and that we cannot disconnect the fall of creation and that we die. So that part is just really important. Those 4, the Genesis, the why do we die, and then the baptismal section and the atonement, those are like the core theological sections of that module. They prepare us to write our story, prepare us to listen to the stories of other, and there's some case studies in there too of actual stories of people walking through the end of their life and the work that they've done, and the sadness and the grief and the heartache and some joy too. Yeah.
So we're going to show the interaction here of an experience, but I want to touch on this, is that you had a schedule. And so talk a little bit about the schedule. Well, actually just talk about the interaction. Then we'll talk about the schedule, how you took people through this, because you're not going through this alone. You're not just,
you're not just
doing
it
by yourself.
No. Well, one of the great things about Convene is the doula, training doulas that are answering my questions, filling out their lesson learned. Their content's anonymous, but it's saved. Yeah. So everybody who comes in, with them or after them can read the content that other people have read. And I've been so encouraged, because I think I'm doing a good job at the creation of the curriculum, because the answers are so good that, I've just been really, really, really impressed. So what we did is, you're talking about like what kind of schedule did I do in module 1, or which one am I doing in module 2?
Well, talk about how you did it in module 1 real quick too.
Yeah. We had 8 classes, and the doulas, we all joined via Zoom, and in the classes, we had a topic and we discussed it. I led the discussion and then opened the floor, and everybody could give in their own thoughts, and it was really great, because we have people at different levels of spirituality, in their Christian walk, and this is open for everybody. And I even encourage people who are not Christians, they can take this course. Like it is not an exclusive course. And I just think that through the collaboration, you just see what other people have as their experience, and it's really great.
Yeah, Laurel, I have 2 sort of comments, questions based on the last couple of slides and what you're saying. So you just mentioned anybody can come in and take the course or come and be a death doula. And I also know just from our past conversations that you found some people that come in, sort of initial clients, if you will, or how did you find the people that initially took the course, and are you guiding them in any sort of way of finding others to bring them in, or how is that working out for you?
That is a great question. So I have a website, that if you type in Christian death doula, not a lot of options come up, and I'm one of the options. So people find me, and it's pretty amazing because the people, so they found me. So the people that are training, at this point, they specifically want a Christian program. Like they have looked out there and they said, I feel called to this role. I'm not going to go through the secular route. And they have their reasons for it, which are the same reasons that, the reason I created this program. And they're very serious. People do not want to, do this conscious dying work of envisioning what your afterlife's going to be. Christians, they don't want to do that. So they found me. Now we've had to answer the second part. We've had discussions. I've had discussions with these doulas on, this is how we're going to grow. Is you're going to get in your community, you're going to talk about your work, and people are going to say, I feel called too. You're going to bring them in to Convene, and that's how we're going to grow out through, through our states, through,
Right.
through the world. Anyway, they don't seem to, seem to be having a trouble finding me because I'm getting, inquiries regularly.
That's great. And I'm going to follow up later on the states and your structure and your ideas about Convene. But the other question I had is, with Convene, you're talking about people responding back and sharing their stories, and it's anonymous and back and forth. And then you mentioned the lessons learned. Certainly they're learning from you. They're learning from others taking the course. Laurel, what are you learning from the people taking the course? I mean, you're reading and responding and everything too, right?
That's a great question. I'm learning a lot. I'm very humbled. Like I am humbled in a good way, not humbled as in like, oh, well, I shouldn't be teaching this course. They know that more than me. No, I'm humbled. I'm humbled at the goodness of God that he has provided a path for me to create this course. And I include Convene in that because I do think that meeting Matt and all of the people that are involved in Convene and seeing that, the purpose of the platform has shaped the way I've developed my curriculum. And so I wouldn't have been able to develop in this way. It's really like nothing could be more perfect for this doula idea of, a legacy when Convene is about creating a legacy. What do you know? What can you share with other people? Right. So it all is a really perfect marriage. Now, what I want to say about, reading through the answers and even in our live discussions, I'll bring up a topic on baptism, for instance. And one of the girls taking my course, her husband is an Episcopal priest. And, I was kind of thinking it like, wow, like I know the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, has emergency baptism for lay people, but she brought it up and said, what do you think about, doulas doing baptism in an emergency?
Yeah.
And I mean, then it gave me the confidence to say, I totally agree. And so, we're going to go down that path and create some more training around that. So this is part of the snowball effect of a movement is more voices because I can only, give so much.
Yeah. Learning from each other. That's great.
Learning from each other.
Yeah. All right. So a couple more slides on your community and let's talk about those is the documents, right? So you laid out pretty great for everybody coming in.
Yep.
They can have documents. You really don't have to talk about these, but you just, you can touch on it real quick that they have the resources that they need.
Yeah, well, they're right there. Well, so when you enter into module 1, you pay for the course and, a video pops up. I'm giving an introduction. I, share my screen and click through, how you get started. And one of the places I go is to this document screen. So Guide to Doula Care is actually all over the community. It's for everybody to read. So everyone, if you're training, if you're looking at training, if you want a doula, if you're a pastor, whoever you are, fully understanding what the role of a doula is. And then the theological curriculum, I'm introducing what we're talking about. I'm introducing my thoughts on the death positive movement. I actually, some of this information is available in one of the blogs on the main community, but I think it's important to note that the death positive movement was a quick phrase that came out of that is a copy on the phrase sex positive. So I'm curious, how seriously are we taking this? So I give my thoughts on that. I talk about Gnosticism in the church. And so, I mean, it's pretty deep but it's accessible as well. And then navigating the model, you click on that and it just kind of tells you what courses you're looking at and what books are recommended, because I include some excerpts from some books, but I do hope people will get the whole book.
Yeah. Module 2. So pull up the experiences for module 2. And I think a key thing to, somebody made a comment earlier about, you talk to people about burial services, you help them maybe with cremation or the different things that they might need. Well, I think one of the great things, and you can talk about this, is module 2 is not just Laurel Marr standing up there teaching on a platform.
No.
You bring other people in, other experts in. So talk about that.
I'm so excited about this module. So medical aid and dying, MAID. I've actually brought in a bioethicist to talk about the debate. Now, I'm not a pro on it, so I'm not moderating a debate inside of my module, right? It is just information. And it's, why we have the debate, what are some risks of being a proponent of medical aid and dying. So it's great. What is hospice care? There are 4 hospice and doula caregiving lessons, experiences, and I've actually collaborated with a hospice nurse. She's a doula and a hospice nurse. Has a lot of the same, or has all of the same concerns about the secular training program. So we collaborated really great. Grief support and the vigil. We let's see. That is, I'm doing that collaboration with a veteran. He's a chaplain for veterans in Arizona, and then estate planning. A lawyer put that course together.
Yeah, and so to the point, you were talking about that in the first segment about power attorneys and those different things. You have somebody actually coming in here and teaching on it.
Yeah. Well, she kind of leaves the advanced directive alone, and she gets into things more like the durable power of attorney, because that works. That's financial and property. And she talks about how doulas should, resource their referrals and the importance of how to talk with your families about going to see a lawyer, and because there are things out there such as LegalZoom and other estate planning tools that you can do online, but she really recommends hiring an attorney, and I think that's the best. And she talks about the reasons and some of the complications that can be had, and I think it's really important because a lot of people are very upset when someone dies, understandably. It'd be strange if they weren't, but if something is not planned right, for instance, like the estate, it can lead to a real mess. And people are always upset about money, even if it's, the kindest person, they never thought they'd get upset about money. People do get upset about money. And so having it done correctly is really, really important, and it will save on people's grief.
I think your module 2 is fantastic from the standpoint of, you're probably as close to an expert on your topic that we have in Convene, or that I can think about a lot of different things, and I kind of equate it to maybe like a high level college class, right? You have a professor that's probably done a lot of studying, a lot of different trips overseas, a lot of different papers and theses, but they're still okay with bringing other experts in to help out, right? So here you are, you're as close to an expert as you can be on this topic, but yet you use the word humility or humble. You're humble enough to know that, hey, there's other people that know more about other parts of this whole concept and this whole program. Let me bring them in. Let me introduce you to what they're saying, and then let's have a little bit of conversation back and forth with it.
Yeah.
Well, you're so right, Jeff. And, that's one of the downfalls of the program that I trained inside of to become a doula is, I think my program, aside from the spirituality section, was excellent. When I had my first case, what she designated as the hardest kind of case you could have, I had it. I went in and it was a young mother, aggressive cancer, right? No time, shock, it's just kind of, it's different than when someone is 80 and they've lived a full life. Of course, there's sadness, but time, there's often that has been prepared for a long time, right?
Yeah.
When a young mother with an aggressive stage 4 cancer, when that happens, it's just a shock, and it's there's a young person left behind. So I had that kind of case as my first case, and I went in there and I felt prepared, and I felt like I did a really good job. So my training program that I took, that that was great. But she trained in every aspect, and she's a nurse. She's not a spiritual, leader. She's not a lawyer. She's not, so she's not a business. I mean, so I've hired people to come in and beef up what I'm doing because it's going to be better for everybody.
Certainly will be. Yeah, absolutely will be. I mean, I'd much rather take a course or just really learn anything from more people than just one, right? You can go to YouTube and watch a video of one person just rambling on and go to the next video and the next video. But if they have other people coming in on the same topic, and I love that module. I think that's such a great idea.
I'm so excited because I just launched it. I mean, people are going to start taking it this week. Now, I do want to say what's really cool too is that the people I brought in to collaborate, as well as the people that are training, everyone's very gung-ho. The people who have done interviews with me, they said, your doulas can reach out to me anytime and ask me a question, right? People are for this movement. The doulas, I have a doula who's training, and she's already got work. And that's sort of why she's wanting to become a doula. Is she's found this role that caring for elderly people in her community is right up her alley. So now she's training, and she's just so gung-ho. And one of her patients died the other day, and the pastor came in and said, I love what you're doing. And he's like, come to my office and tell me more about it. Everybody's so gung-ho.
That's great.
Yeah. All right, we got 2 more slides that I want to cover real quick, and one is the schedule of Module 2, and kind of to give people the idea of what's going on here.
That's it. Okay, so October 3rd, which is just under 2 weeks away, that is a open to the public lesson. I am going to record it and break it up and put it into the training modules for people who come through and do it on their own pace. But I want everyone to come, right? You shouldn't have to pay money to learn how to do your end of life planning, right? You shouldn't have to. Everyone should know how to do end of life planning. We're also going to talk about aging in place. Aging in place is the term for living in your house as you age, not having to move. That doesn't mean it's a suburban house. It may be that you started in a senior apartment that's geared for senior living, but you want to stay there and not move. And this kind of living requires planning, because even a senior apartment, you may have to call in a handyman, right? You're just in a community with with handicap accessible things, right? But it doesn't mean that everything's done for you like in an assisted living. You've got to find your own in-home health care. So all of this takes planning and support.
Yeah, so you can see, we'll just say that these are inside of the Module 2. This is out there, so you'll see it every week. We're going to have a class. We're going to go through it. You're going to have a class.
Well, it's every other week, and it's at 7:30 on Tuesdays. But class 2 through 7 and 8, and through class 8, they are private. You have to be in the training program to attend. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, last thing I want to talk about here real quick, because we're running out of time. We haven't even gotten any questions if anybody has one, but this is wonderful. Again, is that I want to talk about you have a franchise model basically in this. And so you're going to go state to state and grow states. And you and I want to say this, right? You and I have spent a lot of time not just talking about taking your content and putting it into modules, but we've spent a lot of time of talking about how you can turn this into a business, how you can turn this into a resource for individuals wanting to find death doulas. Also, how you can, the people that you're training, how you can help them grow monetary business and make money. So the franchise model, here it is. You have had people here. These states are not mistakes. You have people who have trained from every single one of these states so far, and that's why they're in there.
Oh, and a couple of the states have 2 people from different cities, so that's exciting. Well, what I'm gonna do with the module 2 is that once we get to the business building, like there's a whole section on how to, do you want to be a state leader? Do you want to be in charge of your state and have other doulas underneath you? You're checking in on them, because I can only check in on, so like it's got to be a hierarchy here where I'm checking in on leaders who are checking in on the next, on the next level. But I've got a lot of great ideas with the state directory, because all doula training programs have a directory, but we're going to do it different because Convene allows you to do it differently. But I do need some help from the doulas to be a part of this collaboration so we can grow these states. I can't do that by myself.
It's pretty amazing that there is a platform out there that allows you to do what you've done and build what you want to.
You know, it is. And thank you, Matt. But you know what comes to my mind when I think about this, the Death and Resurrection Doula on Convene platform directory? It's alive. Like, it's a live directory. You go to these other directories of, other doula training programs, they're flat. You don't even know if that doula still works. You don't know. You know nothing about it. They never, the training program I was a part of, they've never called me and asked me, do you still practice? Yep. How do you know? This one's like a living.
Well, you're going to have you're going to have your state leaders running their states. So they're going to be actively, where you'll be having Death Doula meetings here at a high level with your leaders. Your leaders will be running their states and growing the states. Yeah. And then what happens is, if you live in Charlottesville, Virginia, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I really need a death doula. Do you have anybody in North Carolina? Yes. Go see Jeff and Matt. They live in North Carolina in different areas. And so it's really, really wonderful. Jeff, Amy has a question. I want to take that.
Yeah. One, before I ask a quick question, I just want to tell you, Laura, the way you set up your community and your programs and your modules and your states, everybody that's currently on Convene and everybody that's going to come into Convene needs to go to yours and look at how you set it up. It's unbelievable. You really knocked it out of the park, and I'm really excited to see how much further it goes. So kudos to you.
Well, now, I couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you.
You're doing just fine, Laurel. So Amy actually has a question, and I was sort of thinking about the same thing a little while ago, but she asks about family. She says, do you suggest talking to family, namely parents and siblings, about using a death doula? And that's what I was sort of wondering about is, how do you, or when do you, or what type of talks do you have with families?
Great question. I've seen both reactions, positive and negative. Now, typically, if there's an adult sibling that lives where mom or dad lives, they're the ones that's like, we need a death doula. So they go to the siblings that live in other places. And that's been a positive response. They said, sure, they have sometimes they got a little bit of a guilt because they don't live there. They're like, whatever we can do, to help you get the support you need. And that's actually turned out to be a really beautiful model, because with Zoom, we'll have family meetings with all the adult children, or maybe the next layer of grandchildren. And that's been really productive. Now, I did, give someone quite a bit of time, and we talked about a lot of different options. And he said, well, I got to go ask my brothers and sisters. Never heard from him again. So, one issue can be who's going to pay for the doula. Yeah. So, these are things that still, need to be worked out. But my suggestion for talking with the family is just being really honest, being honest about how hard it is, being honest about, what's not been done. Be like, hey, brothers and sisters, we've gone around and around on these conversations and we're not really getting anywhere. What do you think about hiring someone who's a professional in this area to help us?
Interesting.
And don't wait till it's too late, because you know what, it can be, things can go well. Yeah.
Do you suggest, you mentioned this in the first segment about, getting your sort of ducks or your documents in a row and your living wills. And do you suggest, planning or thinking about or contacting a doula, while you're sort of planning your wills and, where you want to be buried and all the things you have to think about when you're, younger than.
There's so many different parts, because, you're going to have a lawyer over here, you're going to have the cemetery over here, you're going to have the funeral home over here. Have a doula help you with all of it, right? And then where do you put your stuff? Now you can go to, joincake.com and upload all of your documents and give your username and password, to your family members. You can be so organized. You can make it fun. If you're well, like, do this when you're well, right? If you're not well and you hire a doula and you didn't do it when you were well, it's never too late to hire a doula. Even if you hire someone the day before a loved one dies. It's never too late. I took on a case 3 years after a suicide, and it was a really, really meaningful case. And I think I was able to do really good work for that family. Never too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's never too early, never too late,
never too early.
Never too early.
Pilot, I saw it. I saw people's lives change on a dime, right? So you can never too early. If
you're 18, you should consider doing a advanced directive.
Yeah, and that's sort of 18. Young people don't think about that.
Yeah, you're invincible at 18, right?
I'll tell you what, it can happen quickly, unfortunately, and you watch families just stand there lost because they don't know what to do. It's sad.
Yeah.
Very sad.
But it's really the fairest for, an 18-year-old to say, hey, I don't want to be intubated, right? Because you would think if you're an 18-year-old, they want to live, right? But life support is not always the best thing at all. And so what does that person want? It's not what mom and dad wants. It's what that person wants.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming up to the end of the thing, and selfless plug here for me and you is that we have worked hard on this, One more question. Let's go ahead and answer it though, because it just popped up. So Laurel, how has the dual training helped you with your fear of death?
That is a great question. Now, I think one of the reasons I have gravitated over towards the Death Doula training is I grew up in a home with a father as a physician. So death was always a normal topic in my home. He was an emergency room physician. He saw death every day. I would go over to the hospital. We'd sometimes eat in the cafeteria with him. I was around the nurses' station. So I've never had a fear of death like that. But if you listen to my story, I had eating disorders, which I think on a very, very, very fundamental level is a fear of being incapacitated, being handicapped, all of these things. So I do know maybe out in the world, I talk about it well, but as a human being, I think it's Martin Luther said, who's not afraid of death? I'm more people have said than that. I'm just thinking of the specific thing that I read on virtue. Is it virtuous to not be afraid of death? That's what he was speaking to. Is it I think we should just leave virtue out of it. Every human being is deeply afraid of death. I do think that planning can help. I think it can relieve some anxieties. But every time one of my patients is terminal and dying, it does make me think about my own mortality. And deeply, I say, I'm glad it's not me in that death.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So we're coming to a time to wrap up. I want to say, first and foremost, you and I have worked hard on this. Like Jeff said, I'm just going to second what Jeff said. You've done an amazing job. It's been really wonderful all the time we've spent building this up, building the strategy. And I want everybody to pay attention to this. If we work, you can build a winning strategy no matter what your topic is. Again, probably the last topic I thought we would have in Convene would be to have a death doula. But what an important topic. And so thank you for all the hard work you've done and everything that you've done being a part of it.
Thank you.
Next thing I'll say is up in the upper left-hand corner, we have a donate button. I want to plug this. Doc is spending a lot of time coming in here, spending a lot of time producing it, doing great things for us. It's not only the time that he spends on this show, it's also the time that he spends, in producing the stuff the next day and all the things that go on in the post-show production and all that. So if you can donate $1 here, $1 there, it helps him pay for his costs, helps us keep this show going, helps us keep it growing and promoting all the great things that people like Laurel are doing with inside of Convene. So I really appreciate everything that you do, Doc. Hit that donate button and just throw a couple $. There. It would be helpful for him. Now, Laurel, I'll give you the last words so you can close us out tonight, and then we're done. Thank you.
I saw a client pop into the chat, and it reminded me. And I've said this to you before, Matt, and how you laugh, but you don't have to be dying to be my client. So don't forget, you don't have to be dying to be my client. Don't think that. And actually, before we went live, I said that I got a call today that someone wants to do counseling just on facing death. So, and she's not sick and dying. She just knows that's what she should do. She does some hospice volunteering. watching people die is bringing up some stuff inside of her, and she wants to talk about it. So there's so many different things you can do as an end-of-life doula. You can sit with people on their deathbed. You can help families. You can help churches, and you can help individuals who just want to talk about it.
Well, keep doing awesome things, Laurel.
Thank you.
Thank you. And everybody, thanks for all the comments. Thanks for watching. Doc, thanks for everything you do. Jeff, thanks for coming on. And Laurel, like I said, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, the difference that you're making in so many people's lives, and just being there. You know, I love the faith-based death doula, the movement that you're doing. It's gonna help so many people across the world, not just across the state of Virginia, across the entire world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And everybody, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Next week, we have the Josh Griffith on. So make sure you watch.
Another Virginia native.
Yep, that's right. Have a good night, everybody.